At a dusty county auction in Montana's Bitterroot Valley, Henry Coleman stands among old tractors and hay balers, his weathered hands gripping the last of his savings. But today isn't about farm equipment. His heart stops when he sees them, two small girls in faded dresses, standing beside their swaying, red-faced father as he loudly offers to sell the burden to the highest bidder. In that moment, something deep inside Henry shifts. Though his own farm is barely staying afloat, he raises his hand. Minutes later, the twins are in his pickup truck, their eyes wide with uncertainty. What twist of fate could possibly await this struggling farmer and these mysterious little girls? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Morning light crept across the weathered floorboards of Henry Coleman's farmhouse kitchen, illuminating the stack of unpaid bills beneath a foreclosure notice. His calloused fingers traced the red stamp, marking another final warning. While outside, his window, the Montana sunrise painted his struggling wheat fields in deceptively golden hues. At 63, Henry's face carried the deep lines of a man who'd spent his life working under open skies. His father had worked this same land, as had his grandfather before him. But times had changed, and small farms like his were becoming memories in a world of corporate agriculture and mechanized efficiency. Sarah would have known what to do. His wife of 38 years had always been the practical one, keeping their books balanced and somehow stretching dollars until they squeaked. 5 years since cancer took her, and still every morning he made 2 cups of coffee out of habit, the second one going cold beside her empty chair. The kitchen radio crackled. With the local farm report, more drought expected, grain prices falling again. Henry switched it off, unable to bear another reminder of the odds stacked against him. He'd sold off parcels of land piece by piece, each sale a small defeat, but it wasn't enough. The bank wanted their money, and his last crop hadn't even covered the interest on his loans. Out in the barn, old Jack, his elderly border collie, waited by the feed bins. The dog's muzzle had gone grey years ago, but his eyes still held that same loyal brightness. "Just you and me again today, boy," Henry murmured, scratching behind Jack's ears. The barn felt too big now, half empty since he'd sold most of his livestock. Only 2 dairy cows remained, along with a small flock of chickens and his faithful horse, Thunder. The morning chores were his ritual, a rhythm unchanged since childhood. Feed the animals, check the fences, repair what he could with baling wire and determination. Each task was a quiet rebellion against the changing times, against the real estate developers who kept leaving messages about exploring options for his land. In town, the changes were even more apparent. The hardware store where he'd bought his first tools was now a trendy coffee shop. The feed store had been replaced by a boutique selling expensive Western wear to tourists. Only Mason's general store remained, a stubborn holdout from earlier days, its worn wooden porch still hosting the same group of old-timers who gathered each morning to drink coffee and debate the weather. "Morning, Henry," called Tom Mason from behind the counter as Henry pushed through the creaking screen door. "Saw your name on the auction list for today." Henry nodded, adjusting his worn Stetson. "Need some equipment parts. Thought I might find a bargain." Tom's weathered face softened with understanding. Everyone knew Henry's situation. In small towns, hardship was a shared burden. "Put your coffee on my tab today," Tom said, sliding a steaming cup across the counter. "Appreciate it, Tom, but I can manage." Henry placed his exact change on the counter, pride being the one thing he could still afford to keep. The morning regulars on the porch watched him as he left, their conversations dropping to whispers. He caught fragments, shame about Coleman's place and banks got no heart, but kept walking. Pity was harder to bear than hardship. Back in his truck, Henry unfolded the auction flyer. Mason's was right. He needed parts. The old tractor was holding together with prayers and patches, and harvest season wouldn't wait for his finances to improve. The county auction was his best chance at finding affordable replacements, though affordable had become a relative term these days. As he drove the familiar road home, Henry passed the Peterson place, now owned by some investment company from California. The old farmhouse had been torn down, replaced by a luxury ranch retreat that looked about as authentic as a plastic flower. Sarah would have had choice words about that. The morning sun caught something in his peripheral vision. Sarah's wind chimes, still hanging on the front porch where she'd put them. The delicate sounds carried on the breeze, a melody that always made him think of her laugh. He'd been so blessed to have her, to share a life built on love and honest work. Now, facing the twilight of that life alone, he wondered what legacy he'd leave behind. No children to inherit the land, no family to carry on the Coleman name. The foreclosure notice waited on his kitchen table like an unwelcome guest. 6 weeks until the bank's deadline. 6 weeks to somehow conjure a miracle or watch 3 generations of family history disappear into corporate ledgers and development plans. Henry poured the cold coffee from Sarah's cup into the sink, straightened his shoulders, and headed out. To the auction. At least there, among the cast-offs and second-hand dreams, he might find something worth salvaging. The county fairgrounds stirred with quiet activity under the late morning sun. Henry parked his pickup beside a row of dusty farm trucks, their beds filled with hopes of finding bargains or offloading memories. He patted the worn leather wallet. In his pocket, $2,000 scraped together from his last hay sale. Not much, but maybe enough for the tractor parts he desperately needed. The auction crowd was typical for Bitterroot Valley. Farmers in worn jeans and sweat-stained hats, a few curious tourists in spotless cowboy boots, and the usual handful of antique dealers hunting for authentic Western Americana. Henry nodded to familiar faces as he collected his bidding paddle, number 147, from a folding table staffed by Mrs. Peterson from the Lutheran Church. "Quite a crowd today," she remarked, her eyes carrying a hint of concern. Everyone knew about the foreclosure notice. "Did you see the notice about the special items? Some folks are selling their whole estate." Henry hadn't noticed, but his attention was suddenly drawn to a commotion near the livestock pens. A man's voice, thick with alcohol and anger, rose above the general murmur. "I said stand still, both of you. Ain't feeding 2 mouths no more." Through a gap in the crowd, Henry saw them. 2 girls, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, standing rigid as fence posts beside a man whose red face and swaying stance spoke of too many morning drinks. They wore identical faded blue dresses, their dark hair neatly braided despite their clothes' shabby state. Something about their posture seemed wrong, too straight, too controlled for children their age. "Dad's selling everything today," the man announced to anyone within earshot, his words slurring. "Including these 2 burdens, rich folks like, kids, right? Always wanting to adopt? Well, here's your chance." A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Harrison from the post office pressed her hand to her mouth. Sheriff Mills, who'd been examining a used saddle, straightened and began moving toward the scene. The girls didn't cry, didn't move. Their faces remained carefully blank, but Henry caught a glimpse of their eyes, deep brown and filled with a resignation no child should know. One girl's hand secretly gripped her sister's, white-knuckled but hidden in the folds of their dresses. "This ain't right," someone muttered nearby. "Someone ought to—" Henry's feet were moving before his mind caught up. The last of his savings. Pressed against his leg through the wallet, money meant for tractor parts that might save his farm. But as he drew closer, he saw one girl's chin quiver slightly, the tiniest crack in her careful composure. The auctioneer, Joe Matthews, looked deeply uncomfortable. "Now, sir, we don't normally—" "Money's money," the drunk father interrupted. 2,000 takes them both. Trained up proper by their mama before she ran off. Know their manners and everything. 2,000. The exact amount in Henry's wallet. Sarah's voice seemed to whisper in his memory. "Sometimes the good Lord puts us where we need to be." Sheriff Mills was still a minute away, pushing through the crowd. The girl's father swayed dangerously, his hand gripping one girl's shoulder too tightly. Henry saw her wince. 2,000, Henry heard himself say, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent auction yard. He held up his paddle, number 147. "I'll take them both." The father squinted at him, then grinned grotesquely. "Sold! No returns, no warranty." He laughed at his own joke, shoving the girls roughly toward Henry. The crowd parted, creating a path. Between them, Henry knelt down to the girl's level, his knees protesting against the gravel. Up close, their features were delicate, almost ethereal, despite smudges of dirt on their cheeks. "I'm Henry," he said softly. "Would you like to come home with me? Got a nice farm, plenty of space. Some animals too." The twins glanced at each. Some silent communication passing between them. Then, in perfect unison, they nodded. Their father was already stumbling toward the beer tent, Henry's money stuffed carelessly in his pocket. Sheriff Mills arrived just then, his face a storm. Cloud. "Henry, what in God's name—" "They're coming home with me, Jim," Henry said firmly, standing up. "Maybe you ought to have a word with their father about a few things." The sheriff looked at the girls, then at Henry, understanding dawning in his eyes. "I'll be out to check on things tomorrow," he said finally. "Make sure everything's proper." Henry nodded, then turned back to the twins. "My truck's just over there. Would you like to meet old Jack? He's my dog, real gentle with everyone." As they walked to his pickup, Henry felt the weight of stares from the crowd. He'd come for tractor parts and left with 2 children. Sarah would have understood. Some things were worth more than money or land. The girls climbed into his truck carefully, arranging their worn dresses with unconscious grace. In the sunlight, Henry noticed a glint of gold at one girl's throat, quickly tucked away beneath her collar. There was more to their story, he was certain, but for now, they were safe, and that was enough. The drive home stretched longer than usual, filled with a silence as delicate as spun glass. Through his rearview mirror, Henry watched the twins sitting perfectly straight, their small hands folded in their laps like they were attending Sunday service. They hadn't spoken a single word since leaving the auction, but their eyes darted everywhere, taking in the passing landscape with careful attention. Old Jack was waiting at the gate, his tail wagging cautiously at the unfamiliar scents in Henry's truck. As Henry helped the girls down from the high seat, he noticed how they moved in perfect synchronization, like dancers following unheard music. Up close, their resemblance was striking. Same heart-shaped faces, same dark eyes that seemed to hold secrets far too heavy for children. "This here's old Jack," Henry said softly. "Best cattle dog in 3 counties, though he's mostly retired. Now." The border collie approached slowly, his herding instinct telling him these little ones needed gentle handling. One of the twins, the one who'd been gripping her sister's hand at the auction, extended her fingers for Jack to sniff. The dog's tail wagged harder, and for the first time, Henry saw the ghost of a smile touch the girl's lips. "Thought we might get you settled inside," Henry continued, leading them toward the farmhouse. "Been a while since I had guests, but Sarah, my wife, she always kept a nice guest room ready." He didn't mention that the room had gathered dust since Sarah's passing, or that he'd been avoiding that part of the house where her presence lingered strongest. The screen door creaked familiarly as they entered the kitchen. Henry noticed how the girl's eyes widened slightly at the worn but clean space, taking in Sarah's old copper pots hanging above the stove and the faded curtains she'd sewn decades ago. One twin spotted the second coffee cup still sitting in the dish drainer and gave Henry a look of such profound understanding that his throat tightened. "You must be hungry," he said, covering his emotion by moving to the refrigerator. "I can. Fix up some sandwiches, and there's fresh milk from morning's milking." The twins glanced at each other, then the slightly taller one, the one who'd smiled at Jack, spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft but clear, with an accent Henry couldn't quite place. "Thank you, sir. We don't wish to be a burden." "No burden at all," Henry replied, his heart aching at the formality in her young voice. "And it's just Henry. No need for sir here." He set about making thick sandwiches with home-cured ham and the last of Sarah's pickle relish from the root. "Zella!" The girls watched his every move, their posture still too rigid for children their age. When he placed the plates before them, they waited until he sat down before picking up their sandwiches, eating with careful, measured bites that spoke of expensive finishing schools rather than a drunk father's raising. "Might be good to know your names," Henry ventured gently, "for the sheriff's visit tomorrow and such." Another silent exchange between the twins. Then the slightly shorter one spoke, her voice a near-perfect match for her sister's. "I'm Grace, and this is Helen." The names seemed to sit strangely on her tongue, as if newly tried on. Henry nodded, not pressing further despite his growing certainty that these weren't their real names. There would be time for truth later. Right now, they needed rest and safety more than questions. After the meal, he showed them to the guest room. Sarah had decorated it years ago, hoping for grandchildren that never came. The blue and white quilt on the double bed was one of her finest works. The twins ran their fingers over the intricate stitching with obvious appreciation for its craftsmanship. "Bathrooms down the hall," Henry explained. "I'm just across the way if you need anything at all." As he turned to leave, Helen, or whatever her real name was, spoke again. "Mr. Henry, thank you for—" She paused, searching for words. "For raising your paddle." The simple gratitude in her voice nearly undid him. "You're safe now," he managed to say. "Both of you. Get some rest." Later that night, unable to sleep, Henry sat at his kitchen table with a cup of cooling coffee. Through the thin walls, he heard soft whispers in a language that definitely wasn't English, confirming his suspicions about their background. He thought about the foreclosure notice hidden in his drawer, the money he'd spent today, and the uncertain future ahead. "Well, Sarah," he whispered to the quiet kitchen, "seems like you sent me to that auction for a reason after all." Outside, the wind stirred Sarah's wind chimes, their gentle song mixing with the whispered conversation of two little girls who carried a mystery as big as Montana itself. Henry smiled slightly, remembering Sarah's favorite saying, "The good Lord works in mysterious ways, love. Our job is just to keep our hearts open and our hands ready." Dawn found Henry already awake, years of farming having set his internal clock to rise with the sun. He moved quietly through his morning routine, careful not to wake his young guests, but as he passed the guest room, he heard soft murmurs. The Cosi doctor was slightly ajar, and what he glimpsed made him pause. The twins sat cross-legged on the bed, their backs straight as arrows, performing what appeared to be a morning ritual. Their hands moved in practiced gestures while they whispered in that mysterious language he'd heard the night before. Around Helen's neck, the gold chain he'd noticed earlier had slipped into view, revealing an ornate heart-shaped locket that seemed far too valuable to belong to a drunk's daughter. Henry stepped back quietly, troubled by the growing certainty that these girls came from somewhere far different than their father had claimed. Their manners, their bearing, even the way they held their teacups at breakfast, everything spoke of privilege and careful training. "Reckon you girls might want to help with morning chores?" he asked later, after serving them eggs from his own hens. "Got 2 dairy cows need milking, and the chickens are always hungry." Grace's eyes lit up with carefully contained excitement. "We would be honored to learn, Mr. Henry." That formal tone again, so strange coming from a child. In the barn, Henry watched in amazement as the twins approached his Holstein cow, Bessie, without a trace of fear. Their small hands moved with surprising confidence, suggesting they'd had some experience with animals, though certainly not on a humble farm like his. "Our grandfather had horses," Helen offered unexpectedly, then quickly pressed her lips together as if she'd said too much. Grace shot her sister a warning look that seemed far too adult for her young face. Throughout the morning, Henry noticed more incongruous details. The girls handled tools with the awkwardness of first-time users, yet their mathematical skills were extraordinary. Grace quickly calculating feed ratios in her head when Henry mentioned the measurements. They spoke English perfectly, yet occasionally slipped into rapid exchanges in their unknown language, especially when they thought he couldn't hear. Around noon, Martha Johnson from the Church Ladies' Auxiliary arrived with a box of donated clothes. "Thought the girls might need something fresh to wear," she said, though Henry caught her curious glances toward the twins, who were teaching old Jack to sit with hand signals he'd never seen before. "They're something special, aren't they?" Martha whispered. "Way they carry themselves, like little princesses playing at being farm girls." Her words hit uncomfortably close to Henry's own thoughts. When the twins tried on their new clothes, their innate grace made even simple hand-me-downs look elegant. Henry noticed how they automatically reached to adjust imaginary jewelry at their necks, a habitual gesture that spoke of wearing fine necklaces their whole lives. Later that afternoon, while the girls were collecting eggs, Henry discovered their worn traveling bag tucked carefully under the guest bed. He wouldn't have disturbed it, but a corner of rich blue silk had caught his eye, peeking out from the rough canvas. Inside, wrapped in that incongruously fine silk, he found a small book. The text was in an alphabet he didn't recognize, but the quality of the binding and the gold-leafed pages suggested it was far more valuable than anything a poor farmer's children should possess. He carefully returned everything exactly as he'd found it, his concern growing. Were these girls runaways from some wealthy foreign family? Had their father at the auction been their kidnapper rather than their parent? The sheriff's visit tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. At dinner, he noticed how the twins automatically waited for him to take the first bite, a formal dining etiquette he'd only seen in movies about European royalty. When Helen reached for the salt, her sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing what looked like a delicate tattoo or brand on her inner wrist. She quickly tugged the sleeve down, but not before Henry glimpsed an intricate symbol that matched the design on her hidden locket. "You know," he said carefully, keeping his tone casual, "if there's anything you girls need to tell me, anything at all, I'm ready to listen." The twins exchanged one of their silent looks. Grace's hand crept up to touch something under her collar, probably a matching locket to her sister's. For a moment, it seemed they might speak, but then Helen shook her head slightly, and the moment passed. That night, after the girls had gone to bed, Henry sat at his kitchen table with Zara's old Bible. "What am I dealing with here, love?" he whispered to her memory. "What kind of mystery have we taken in?" As if in answer, a gust of wind stirred the chimes on the porch, and through the thin walls he heard the twins whispering in their unknown language. Something about their tone reminded him of prayers. The next few days settled into an unexpected rhythm on the Coleman farm. Henry discovered that while the twins might not know much about farm work, they approached every task with determination and intelligence that belied their years. They learned quickly, their natural grace turning even mundane chores into something almost ceremonial. "See here," Henry demonstrated one morning, showing them how to check wheat kernels for ripeness. "You squeeze it between your teeth. If it's soft, it needs more time." The girls studied his technique with intense concentration, reminding him of university students he'd once seen visiting the county agricultural station. Grace picked a wheat head and tested it exactly as he'd shown, then turned to her sister. "The protein content would be approximately 14%, she said matter-of-factly, using vocabulary no farm child would know. Helen nodded in agreement, then caught Henry watching them and quickly busied herself with another wheat sample. These moments of slipped masks were becoming more frequent. Yesterday, Helen had automatically reached for non-existent reading glasses when examining the farm ledger Henry had left open, a gestural memory that suggested hours spent studying financial documents. This morning, Grace had absent-mindedly hummed what sounded like a classical violin concerto while feeding the chickens. "Your father," Henry ventured carefully during lunch, "he didn't teach you much about farming, did he?" The twins stiffened slightly. "No, sir. Mr. Henry," Grace answered. We lived differently before." "Different country," he prompted gently, their faces closed like shutters against a storm. "We should finish the morning feeds," Helen said, standing with that impossible perfect posture. But as she turned, Henry caught a glimpse of fear in her eyes, not of him, but of something distant that still held power over them. The afternoon brought Sheriff Mills, his patrol car raising dust on the long driveway. Henry met him on the porch, while the twins watched warily from the barn doorway. "Checked into that father of theirs," Jim Mills said quietly. "Man's gone, left town on the evening bus. Ticket to Seattle." He paused, scratching his chin. "Funny. Thing is, nobody around here knows him. No record of him living in the county, no rental agreements, nothing." Henry nodded, unsurprised. "Girls have papers, birth certificates, working on it, but Henry..." The sheriff lowered his voice further. "Got some calls from up the chain, people asking interesting questions about 2 missing girls. Important people." Before Henry could respond, a commotion erupted from the chicken coop. Old Jack was barking, and they heard Grace cry out in surprise. Henry and the sheriff rushed around the corner to find Helen helping her sister up from where she'd slipped in the mud. For a moment, the twins' careful composure cracked, and they were just little girls giggling at the mess. The sight stopped both men in their tracks. It was the first time Henry had heard them laugh. Really laugh, not the polite, measured chuckles they usually allowed themselves. The sound transformed them from mysterious little adults back into children, if only for a moment. "Leave it with me for now," Jim Mills said softly, watching the girls try to clean Grace's dress with unpracticed hands. "Unless you're wanting to send them to state care. They're staying," Henry said firmly. Some decisions required no thought at all. After the sheriff left, Henry found the twins in Sarah's old sewing room, attempting to repair Grace's mud-stained dress. Their fingers, so sure with complex mathematics or formal etiquette, fumbled with the simple needle and thread. "Here," Henry said, taking the dress. "Sarah taught me a thing or two about mending." As he worked, he told them stories about Sarah, about their early years on the farm, about the drought they survived together and the good years that followed. Gradually, he felt the twins relax beside him. "Our mother," Helen said suddenly, then stopped, looking at her sister. Grace gave a tiny nod, and Helen continued softly. "Our mother used to sew with us, too. Before, she didn't finish. But she didn't need to." Henry focused on his stitching, giving them space to hold their secrets close. "Well," he said finally, "Sarah always said, a family's like a patchwork quilt. Might not match perfect, might have some odd pieces, but if you sew it together with love, it holds." That evening, he found a drawing slipped under his door, a detailed sketch of his farm, rendered with architectural precision. The twins had labeled everything in elegant handwriting, adding small notes about needed repairs he'd mentioned in passing. In the corner, in careful English, they'd written, "Thank you for the safe harbor, such a formal, specific word." Henry added it to his mental list of clues about their true background, but as he listened to them getting ready for bed, speaking their secret language with more animation than before, he realized something. The mystery of their past mattered less than the trust they were slowly building together. The Bitterroot Valley Public Library wasn't much to look at, just a converted Victorian house with creaking floors and perpetually dusty windows. But on this particular Tuesday morning, its calm was disturbed by an unusual flurry of activity. Henry sat at one of the ancient computers, methodically scrolling through international news websites, while Carmen Rodriguez, the head librarian, pulled stacks of newspapers from the archives. "Found something," Carmen whispered, placing a week-old copy of the International Herald beside his keyboard. "Look at this. Private school in Switzerland. 2 girls gone missing." She paused, glancing around before adding, "The resemblance is remarkable." Henry studied the grainy photograph. 2 girls in expensive school uniforms, standing beside a distinguished-looking woman at some society function. The caption read, "Countess Katerina Volkov, with granddaughters at Royal Academy Spring Gala." The faces were unmistakable, though. In the photo, the twins wore confident smiles instead of careful masks. His hands trembled slightly as he read further. The girls' names weren't Grace and Helen, but Anastasia and Alexandra Volkov, heirs to one of Europe's oldest banking fortunes. Their mother, the article explained, had died under mysterious circumstances 2 years ago. The grandmother had been fighting for custody against the girls' father, a former Olympic athlete who'd married into the family and was now suspected of orchestrating their disappearance. "There's more," Carmen said, laying out another paper. "The grandmother's offering a reward, $5 million for information leading to their safe return." Henry barely heard the amount. He was thinking of the twins at home, helping old Jack herd the cattle into the north pasture. This morning, they'd laughed when one of the heifers licked Anastasia's face. Real laughter, not the controlled chuckles they usually allowed themselves. The library's front door chimed. Sheriff Mills entered, accompanied by a tall man in an expensive suit who moved with military precision. Henry recognized the type from his army days. "Private security, high-end." "Mr. Coleman," the man said quietly, extending a hand. "I'm Michael Drake, Aegis International Security. Could we speak privately?" They moved to the library's small reading room, where the stranger placed a laptop on the table. "We've been tracking the girls since their disappearance from Switzerland." Drake explained, his tone professional but not unkind. "Their father, Victor Petrov, used his sports connections to arrange false papers and transportation. We believe he intended to use the girls as leverage for accessing their trust funds." Security footage appeared on the screen. The twins, father at various airports, looking very different from the drunk at the auction. "Petrov's been apprehended in Seattle," Drake continued. "He broke under questioning, admitted to planning their sale to throw us off the trail. Never expected someone would actually buy them." Henry's throat tightened. "The girls, are they in danger?" "Not anymore," Sheriff Mills interjected. "But Henry, their grandmother's flying in. Private jets landing tonight at Missoula International." The implications slowly sank in. Of course they would have to go back. These weren't abandoned farm children. They were European heiresses, with a life of privilege and responsibility waiting for them. "They've seemed happy these past few days," Henry said quietly, thinking of their morning rituals in the barn, their careful notes about farm management, their growing ease with country life. Drake's professional mask softened slightly. "The Countess is grateful, Mr. Coleman. She understands you spent your savings, missed mortgage payments to protect them. She wants to—" "I didn't do it for money," Henry interrupted sharply. "No," Drake agreed, studying him. "That's exactly why the Countess is interested in meeting you." Back at the farm that afternoon, Henry watched the twins brushing Thunder, his old quarter horse. They were singing something in their native language. Russian, he now knew, their voices carrying across the paddock. They'd stopped hiding, their grace and education quite so carefully, as if they too sensed that change was coming. "Girls," he called softly. They turned, and he saw the instant awareness in their eyes. They'd known this day would come. "Is it grandmother?" Alexandra, formerly Helen, asked, her voice steady but small. Henry nodded. "She's coming tonight. She's been so worried about you both." The twins exchanged glances. Then Anastasia spoke. Will we have to leave immediately?" The hesitation in her voice broke his heart a little. "That's up to your grandmother," he said gently. "But you'll always have a home here, if you want it." They surprised him then, breaking their careful protocol to rush forward and hug him tightly. He felt the expensive gold lockets press against his worn shirt, physical reminders of the world they came from. But their tears were those of ordinary children afraid of losing something precious they'd found. "Thank you," Alexandra whispered, "for not being afraid to bid." Sunset painted the farmhouse in shades of amber as 3 black SUVs wound their way up the gravel drive. Henry stood on his porch, freshly dressed in his best shirt, the one Sarah had bought him for church, watching the twins peek nervously through the screen door behind him. They wore their original dresses, now carefully cleaned and pressed, their lockets prominently displayed rather than hidden. The center vehicle stopped, and a woman emerged with the kind of elegant authority that made even the dusty farmyard seem like a palace receiving room. Countess Katerina Volkov carried her 70 years with regal bearing. Her silver hair swept into an immaculate chignon, her tailored travel suit probably worth more than Henry's entire farm. But it was her eyes that held Henry's attention. The same deep brown as her granddaughter's, filled with a lifetime of both power and pain. Those eyes swept past him to fix on the screen door, where the twins stood frozen in uncertainty. "Babushka," they whispered in unison, then burst through the door, their careful composure finally shattering completely. The Countess knelt, heedless, of her expensive suit touching the porch boards, gathering her granddaughters into her arms as tears streaked her perfectly made-up face. They spoke rapidly in Russian, their words tumbling over each other as the twins tried to explain everything. At once, Henry stepped back, giving them space for their reunion, but the Countess's hand shot out to grasp his wrist with surprising strength. "You," she said, her accent refined but prominent, "you are the one who saved them. My investigators told me everything." She looked up at him, still holding her granddaughters close. "You spent your last money to protect children you didn't know. Why?" Henry shrugged, uncomfortable under her intense scrutiny. "Wasn't right, seeing them treated that way. Anyone would have done the same." "No," the Countess said firmly. "They would. Not, I have learned this lesson painfully." She turned back to the twins, touching their faces as if ensuring they were real. "Your mother, my Natalia, she trusted too easily, believed in Victor's charm, his promises of love. We all did at first." Alexandra pressed closer to her grandmother. "Father said Mother's death was an accident." The Countess's face hardened. "The Swiss authorities are not so certain anymore, but that is a conversation for another time." She straightened up, every inch the aristocrat again. "Mr. Coleman, my security team tells me you have treated my granddaughters with extraordinary kindness. They speak of learning to milk cows, of a gentle old dog, of feeling safe for the first time since—" She paused, composing herself. "Since they lost their mother. They're remarkable girls," Henry said simply. "Brought some life back to this old place." Anastasia tugged at her grandmother's sleeve. "Babushka, Henry needs help. The bank wants to take his farm. He spent his mortgage money to save us." The Countess's eyebrows rose. "Is this true?" Henry shifted uncomfortably. "Bank's been patient enough. Sometimes things just run their course." "Perhaps," the Countess said thoughtfully. "Or perhaps things run to where they are meant to be." She turned to Michael Drake, who stood respectfully by the SUV. "Bring me the documents." Drake retrieved a leather portfolio, which the Countess opened to reveal legal papers. "Mr. Coleman, after speaking with my investigators, I took the liberty of having my attorneys draw up some proposals. The first—" She handed him a document. "This is the reward money, as promised, $5 million, already cleared through international banking channels." Henry tried to hand it back. "Ma'am, I didn't do it for—" "I know," she interrupted, "which is precisely why you deserve it. But there is something else." She withdrew another document. "The girls tell me you have no family, no children to inherit. This land that clearly means so much to you." Henry nodded, thinking of Sarah's empty coffee cup still sitting in his kitchen cabinet. "My granddaughters need protection, not just from their father, but from those who would use them for their inheritance. They need a safe harbor, as they called it in their messages to me. Somewhere to be children, not just heiresses." She smiled slightly. "They also, it seems, need to learn about wheat protein content and proper chicken feeding techniques." She handed him the second document. "This is a proposal, a partnership. Your experience, your land, combined with resources that could make this farm a model of sustainable agriculture, a place where my granddaughters could spend time safely, learning values I fear they might not find in European boarding schools." Henry stared at the paper, his vision blurring slightly. "You're talking about staying here?" "Part of the year," the Countess clarified. "They have obligations in Europe, educational requirements, but yes, significant time here, under the protection and guidance of someone who has proven he cares more about their hearts than their bank accounts. She paused, watching him carefully. If you are willing, of course. The twins looked up at him with hopeful eyes, their hands clasped together, just as they had been at the auction. But now, instead of fear, their faces shone with possibility. Old Jack chose that moment to amble up onto the porch, settling himself comfortably between the twins, as if they'd always belonged there. The Countess looked down at the dog, then back at Henry, a knowing smile touching her lips. Sometimes, she said softly, family finds us in the most unexpected places. The farmhouse kitchen had never hosted anything quite like this evening's gathering. The Countess sat at Henry's worn table, her perfect posture somehow making the simple wooden chair look like a throne, while Alexandra and Anastasia helped Henry serve coffee in Sarah's old cups. Michael Drake and 2 other security team members maintained a discreet presence on the porch, while Sheriff Mills completed the unusual assembly. It's time, the Countess said gently to her granddaughters, to tell Mr. Coleman everything. He has earned the truth, and if he is to be part of our lives, he must understand what he's protecting you from. The twins settled into chairs, their shoulders touching. Anastasia, the slightly bolder one, began. Our mother was brilliant. At banking, at growing the family business. Father, he wasn't used to having a wife more successful than him, more powerful. Natalia tried to make it work, the Countess continued, her voice tight with controlled emotion. Even after she discovered the gambling debts, the secret loans, she paid them off quietly, protected his pride. But then she found something worse. Alexandra's hand crept into her sister's. Father was selling information about our clients, banking secrets. When Mother confronted him, the brake lines on her car were cut, the Countess said flatly. The Swiss police ruled it an accident, but recently new evidence has emerged. Victor's debts were deeper than we knew, and some of his creditors were very dangerous people. Henry thought of the drunk, desperate man at the auction, trying to sell his own children. He was running from someone. Several someones, Sheriff Mills confirmed. Interpol's been building a case. International banking fraud, industrial espionage, and now kidnapping. He'll be in prison for a very long time. But his associates are still out there, the Countess added. People who know the girls are heirs to one of Europe's largest private banks, who might see them as leverage. She reached across the table to touch Henry's weathered hand. This is why your farm, your protection, means so much. Here, they can be simply children, not banking royalty, not targets. We love it here, Anastasia said softly. The animals, the open space, even the hard work. She smiled slightly. Though we still can't quite get the hang of darning socks. Sarah could teach you. Henry started automatically, then stopped. The familiar ache catching him, but when he looked at the twins, he saw understanding in their eyes. They'd lost a mother. They knew about holes in the heart that never quite filled. The Countess noticed the exchange. Tell me about your Sarah, she said gently. And somehow in that strange gathering, Henry found himself talking about his wife, really talking about her, not just holding her memory close. He told them about her passion for the land, her quiet, strength, her dream of turning the farm into something that would last. She would have loved these girls, he finished simply. I think, the Countess said, she led you to them. She withdrew more papers from her portfolio. Now, shall we discuss the practical details? The farm needs modernization, irrigation systems, new equipment, but we must be careful not to change its essential character. The girls speak of its soul, something I've learned not to dismiss. They talked late into the night, working out the complexities of their unprecedented arrangement. The twins would spend summers and selected holidays at the farm, with their private tutors coming to them. The Countess would provide resources not just for the farm's survival, but for its transformation into a sustainable agriculture center. Henry would retain full ownership, but gain partners invested in its future. There's one more thing, Alexandra said suddenly, reaching for her locket. She opened it to reveal a tiny photograph, a beautiful woman with the twins' dark eyes, smiling at the camera. "This is our mother. We'd like to put her picture up, maybe next to Sarah's, since this will be our American home now." Henry felt his throat tighten. He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. The Countess stood, her usual imperial manner softened by evident emotion. "I believe Natalia and Sarah would both approve of this arrangement. Different worlds coming together, making something new." She smiled at Henry. "After all, isn't that what America is about?" Later, after the twins had gone to bed and the security team had established their night positions around the property, Henry sat on his porch with the Countess. They watched the Montana stars emerge, so much brighter than European skies. "You know," he said finally, "Sarah used to say every good story has a moment where God's hand becomes visible. A moment that looks like coincidence but isn't." The Countess nodded, understanding. "In Russia, we say fate has careful fingers. It weaves threads together for a purpose." She looked at him with those eyes so like her granddaughter's. "That day at the auction, you were meant to be there. Not just for the girls, but for yourself too." From inside, they heard the twins' soft laughter as they practiced their evening farm vocabulary with Sheriff Mills. The sound drifted out into the night air, mixing with the gentle chime of Sarah's wind bells and the distant lowing of cattle. Two worlds, Henry thought, becoming something new, something just maybe meant to be. Morning came to the Coleman farm with new sounds mixing among the familiar. The twins' Russian prayers blended with roosters crowing, while quiet conversations in multiple languages drifted from the security team's vehicles. Henry stood at his own kitchen window, watching the Countess walk the property's fence line in designer boots, her phone pressed to her ear as she spoke rapidly to someone about irrigation systems. "Mr. Henry," Alexandra appeared at his elbow, her formal manner returning, slightly with the changed circumstances. "A grandmother wishes to discuss the property deed. She says—" The girl hesitated. "She says you're being too stubborn about accepting help." Henry smiled slightly. In the days since their revelation, he and the Countess had engaged in a gentle battle of wills over money. She wanted to simply pay off his mortgage. He insisted on maintaining his stake in the property. Pride, maybe, or something deeper. The need to preserve what 3 generations of Colemans had built. "Your grandmother's used to getting her way, isn't she?" Alexandra's answering smile was pure Russian aristocrat. "Always, but she also respects those who stand their ground. She says you remind her of mother that way." Outside, Anastasia was showing the Countess the chicken coop, explaining with surprising expertise about egg production and feed costs. The elegant older woman looked oddly at home, despite her expensive clothing, asking detailed questions and taking notes on a platinum iPad. Henry, Michael Drake, approached from the security vehicle, his manner professional but troubled. "We've got some concerns about the property's exposure. Too many open sight lines, not enough secure access points. The Countess wants to discuss upgrading the perimeter." And there it was, the collision of his simple farming life with a world of international threats and security protocols. Henry thought of the twins doing their morning chores, finally relaxing into something like normal childhood. How could they preserve that while keeping them safe? "Perhaps," the Countess called, having finished her inspection, "we could discuss this over breakfast. I've had my chef flown in from Geneva. He's quite eager to experience a real American farm kitchen." Henry wanted to protest. The thought of a European chef in Sarah's simple kitchen seemed almost sacrilegious. But then he caught the twins, watching anxiously. They stood in the space between the security vehicles and the chicken coop, between their old world and their new one, clearly worried about how this merge would work. "Breakfast sounds fine," he said, "though I hope your chef knows how to handle fresh eggs and home-cured bacon." The relief on the girls' faces made any discomfort worth it. Soon, the kitchen was filled with the unlikely combination of a French-trained chef working alongside Henry, while the twins set the table with Sarah's everyday dishes, and the Countess's security team coordinated patrol schedules. "Now then," the Countess said once they were seated, "about the property deed. My lawyers have drawn up a partnership agreement that I believe addresses both our concerns." She slid a document across the table. "The farm remains in Coleman hands, but with a trust established for its development and protection. The girls would be beneficiaries alongside any future heirs you might name." Henry studied the paper, noting how carefully it was worded to protect both his independence and the twins' connection to the land. "You've given this some thought." "I've learned from experience," she replied, a shadow crossing her face. "When Natalia married Victor, we didn't protect her assets properly, trusted too much in love and good intentions." She touched her granddaughter's hands. "This time we'll do things properly, protect what matters while allowing it to grow." The twins watched the exchange with those old soul eyes of theirs, understanding far more than children their age should about trusts and legal protections. But then old Jack scratched at the screen door, and they were suddenly just little girls again, eager to feed their friend some bacon under the table. "There's something else," Henry said, reaching for an old folder he'd dug out last night. "Sarah had plans for this place, dreams of turning it into a teaching farm, showing young folks sustainable methods." He spread out his wife's carefully drawn diagrams. Never had the money to do it properly, but the Countess lifted the papers with careful respect. "These are excellent proposals, very similar to some agricultural education programs in Switzerland." She looked at her granddaughters. "Perhaps this is another way to honor both your mothers, creating something that combines Sarah's vision with Natalia's business acumen." "We could help," Anastasia said eagerly. "We're learning about crop rotation and soil chemistry, and Grandmother knows people at the best agricultural universities." Henry watched them bend over Sarah's old drawings, the Countess adding notes in elegant handwriting, while the twins suggested modifications based on their newly acquired farming knowledge. Outside, the security team was already measuring for fencing upgrades, while the chef exclaimed over the quality of Henry's home-cured meats. Two worlds colliding should have felt chaotic, wrong. Instead, it felt like pieces of a puzzle finally, fitting together. Not easily, not without effort, but with a rightness that seemed guided by something larger than chance. Sarah always said, he found himself saying, that the good Lord doesn't waste anything, not even pain, not even loss. He just waits for the right time to show you why. The Countess met his eyes with unexpected warmth. "In my experience, Mr. Coleman, he also knows exactly when to send the right people into our lives." She smiled at her granddaughters, who were now teaching the chef how to properly check eggs for freshness, even if they arrive in the most unlikely places. The next few weeks brought changes to the Coleman farm at a pace that left Henry's head spinning. Modern irrigation systems appeared almost overnight, their installation supervised by agricultural experts who spoke reverently of precision farming and sustainable methodologies. The twins followed these specialists around the property, pepper spray-painted stakes marking future developments. But it was the small changes that touched Henry's heart most deeply, like this morning, watching the Countess, who'd insisted. He called her Katerina, sitting at his kitchen table in a silk robe, learning to use Sarah's old coffee percolator. "In Geneva," she admitted, carefully measuring grounds, "I have a machine that costs more than a car. But this tastes like real coffee should." She inhaled the aroma with obvious pleasure. "Like the coffee my grandmother made, before the revolution changed everything." The twins had adapted to their double life with surprising ease. In the mornings, they did farm chores in worn jeans and work boots. After lunch, they'd transform into young aristocrats for video conferences with their European tutors, discussing advanced mathematics and international economics. Then back to helping Henry repair fences or learning about crop rotation. "We're teaching Grandmother about wheat futures," Anastasia announced proudly one afternoon, as Henry watched the Countess examine his ledgers with professional interest. "She says understanding commodity markets from the ground up will make us better bankers." "And Henry's teaching us about real value," Alexandra added. "Things you can't put numbers on." The security upgrades proceeded with subtle efficiency. New fencing blended naturally with the landscape, while cameras disguised. As wildlife boxers kept watch, Michael Drake's team had become part of the farm's rhythm, their protective presence almost forgotten, until some new protocol would remind everyone of the dangers still lurking in the wider world. "Had an interesting call," Sheriff Mills said, during one of his regular visits. "Someone asking too many questions about the auction. Drake's people are tracking it." He paused, watching the twins teach old Jack to herd chickens. Hard to believe anyone would want to harm those two. Henry understood. The girls had blossomed in the weeks since their true identity emerged. Their formal masks dropped more often, now revealing the children they should have been all along. Yet they maintained a unique dignity, a grace that came not from their aristocratic background, but from something deeper, the resilience of young hearts healing. The partnership agreement had been finalized with a solution that satisfied everyone's pride and priorities. The farm would remain under Coleman ownership, with a substantial trust established for its development. The twins would have a protected stake in its future, while Henry maintained operational control. More importantly, the legal framework ensured the farm would always be a sanctuary for them, regardless of what happened in their complicated European world. "You've given them something priceless," Katerina said one evening as they watched the girls help the chef gather fresh vegetables for dinner. "A place where they don't have to be heirs or victims or symbols of anything, where they can just be Alexandra and Anastasia." Henry thought about that as he did his evening checks. The barn now housed state-of-the-art equipment alongside his old tools, but its heart remained unchanged. The twins had decorated their part of the tack room with a curious mixture of expensive riding gear and homemade crafts, including a carefully drawn family tree that somehow incorporated everyone, from the Volkov banking dynasty to 3 generations of Colemans, with Sarah's name written in both English and Russian. "Sarah," he whispered that night to the quiet kitchen, "you should see how your dreams are growing." As if in answer, her wind chimes tinkled in the evening breeze, mixing with the sound of the twins practicing their English reading aloud on the porch. They were working through Sarah's old collection of Louis L'Amour westerns, their aristocratic accents wrapping carefully around words like cowpoke and rustler. While security teams maintained their invisible vigil, the morning would bring more changes. Architects to discuss converting the old hay barn into an agricultural education center, banking advisors to consult on investment strategies for the farm's expansion, tutors to continue the girls' preparation for their eventual roles in European finance. But for now, in the gathering dusk, it was just family, unlikely and unmatched, pieced together by fate or providence or whatever name you gave to the force that sometimes turned endings into beginnings. Henry smiled, hearing Katerina gently correcting the twins' pronunciation of particularly difficult Western slang. Some things, he reflected, were worth more than all the Swiss bank accounts in the world. Some wealth couldn't be measured in dollars, or euros or rubles, but in the sound of children's laughter floating across freshly irrigated fields. The first snow of December transformed the Coleman farm into something from a fairy tale. Heavy flakes softened the outline of new security fencing and frosted the solar panels recently installed on the barn roof. Inside the farmhouse, warmth and unlikely family traditions were taking root. "Careful with that ornament," Henry called as the twins balanced precariously on kitchen chairs, decorating their first American Christmas tree. The ornament in question, a delicate glass ball that had belonged to Sarah, was being handled with the same reverence the girls usually reserved for their family jewels. "It's beautiful," Alexandra breathed, hanging it on a high branch, like the ones in the Winter Palace Museum. Katerina, looking surprisingly comfortable in a cashmere sweater and jeans, was sorting through boxes of Sarah's old decorations. "Your mother loved Christmas," she told the twins. "She would have adored this, bringing traditions together." Indeed, Sarah's handmade wreaths now hung alongside elegant European ornaments, while traditional Russian Christmas cookies shared space with Henry's mother's sugar cookie recipe. The security team had even gotten into the spirit, helping string lights along the porch and participating in the girls' determined efforts to teach old Jack to pull a small sleigh. But it wasn't just Christmas that marked their evolution as a family. The past months had seen quiet triumphs that went beyond the farm's impressive new facilities. Like the day Alexandra finally mastered driving the tractor, her perfect posture incongruous against the machine's worn seat, or when Anastasia's careful calculations about crop rotation earned praise from both her banking tutors and the local agricultural extension officer. "Look what we found," Anastasia called now, pulling another treasure from the decoration boxes. It was a photo album, its leather cover cracked with age. Henry recognized it immediately. Sarah had documented every Christmas of their marriage. They gathered around the kitchen table where the chef, Jean-Luc, now as much a part of the family as anyone, was preparing hot chocolate with a precision usually reserved for French haute cuisine. The twins climbed into chairs on either side of Henry, while Katerina leaned in close, all pretense of aristocratic reserve forgotten. "That's Sarah," Henry said softly, pointing to a young woman laughing in the snow. "First Christmas after we bought the farm. Hardest year of our lives, but she still made everything magical. She looks kind," Alexandra observed, touching the photo gently. Like Mother, she reached for her ever-present locket, opening it to compare the two women, different in appearance. Sarah's simple farm wife beauty against Natalia's sophisticated elegance, but both with the same warm eyes, the same gentle strength. "They would have been great friends," Katerina said, her voice thick with emotion. "Natalia always said banking should serve real people, support actual communities. She would have loved what we're building here. What they were building had exceeded everyone's expectations. The farm's new irrigation system had increased yield by 40%. The educational center, set to open in spring, had a waiting list of students eager to learn sustainable farming techniques. European banking met American agriculture, creating something unique and valuable. But the real profit couldn't be measured in bushels or bank accounts. It showed in the way the twins now moved confidently between their two worlds, as comfortable in silk dresses at banking video conferences as they were in muddy boots helping with the harvest. It showed in how Katerina had learned to drive Henry's old truck, insisted on taking regular turns with the chores, and spoke with genuine passion about crop futures and soil conservation. "Henry," Anastasia said suddenly, would it be all right if we called you grandfather, Dedushka in Russian?" She rushed on before he could respond. "We've been practicing saying it, and grandmother says it's proper because you're our American family now, and—" "What my sister means," Alexandra interrupted with her usual diplomacy, "is that we love you, as much as if you were our real grandfather. More maybe because we chose each other." Henry found he couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. He pulled both girls close, breathing in the curious mixture of expensive shampoo and barn hay that now seemed perfectly natural. "I'd be honored," he managed finally, "though you'll have to teach me to say that Russian word properly." "Dedushka," they said in unison, giggling at his first attempts to pronounce it. Later that evening, after the twins had gone to bed and Katerina had retired to the guest room that was now firmly hers, Henry stood on the porch. The security team's night shift moved quietly in the darkness, their presence no longer an intrusion, but a comfort. Sarah's wind chimes, decorated with tiny Christmas lights, tinkled softly in the snow-hushed air. "Well, love," he whispered, "look what you've given me. Look what you've given us all." From inside came the sound of the twins singing Russian Christmas carols in their sleep, the ancient melody carrying easily through the farmhouse walls. The sound mixed with the wind chimes, creating a harmony that seemed to bridge heaven and earth, past and present, loss and love. Family, Henry reflected, watching the snow transform his world, came in all sorts of packages. Sometimes it took losing everything to find what you never knew you needed. The letter arrived on a bright January morning, mixed innocuously among seed catalogues and farm equipment brochures. No return address, just expensive paper with a Swiss postmark. Henry might have missed its significance if not for Michael Drake's sharp intake of breath during the daily security mail screening. "Inside," Drake ordered, his professional manner shifting to high alert. "Now." In the kitchen, Katerina read the letter with a face carved from stone, while the twins pressed close to Henry, their bodies tense with remembered fear. The threat was elegant in its simplicity, a detailed description of the farm's daily routines, followed by a clear demand. 10 million euros in untraceable cryptocurrency, or Victor's business associates, would finish what he'd started. "They've been watching us," Alexandra whispered, her accent stronger with stress. "All this time." "Let them watch," Henry said firmly, his arm tightening around the girls. "This is our home. We're not giving it up to shadows and threats." Katerina's eyes met his over the twins' heads. In that moment, she wasn't the refined countess, but something fiercer, a grandmother protecting her cubs. "Michael, implement Protocol 7 and call Geneva. I want our full security team here within 24 hours." The farm transformed with terrifying efficiency. Additional security personnel materialized from unmarked vehicles. New surveillance equipment appeared, while tactical teams swept every building, every field. Sheriff Mills coordinated with state law enforcement, setting up discreet checkpoints on surrounding roads. But it was the psychological impact that hurt Henry most. The twins' nightmares returned, their screams echoing through the farmhouse at night. During the day, they stayed close to the buildings, jumping at unexpected sounds. Their careful masks were back, the ones they'd worn at the auction, designed to hide fear behind perfect manners. "We should leave," Anastasia said one evening, her voice small. "Go back to Switzerland, keep you safe." "Safe?" Henry set down his coffee cup harder than intended. "Girls, look at me." He waited until both pairs of dark eyes met his. "Your mother didn't raise you to run from bullies. Sarah didn't build this farm for it to bow to threats, and I didn't find you just to lose you to fear." "Henry's right," Katerina said from the doorway. She'd been on the phone for hours with banking investigators and security consultants. "Besides, we've identified the source. Victor's old contacts in the Russian banking underground. They're desperate, the authorities are closing in, and they think you girls are their last chance at leverage." "Then let them come," Henry said. Quietly, the others turned to him, surprised by the steel in his voice. "I was army before I was a farmer. Still remember a thing or two about protecting what's mine." That night, after the twins had finally fallen asleep, Henry sat with Katerina on the porch. Security teams moved through the darkness with military precision, while old Jack kept his own watch from the front steps. "You know," Katerina said softly, "when Natalia died I thought I'd failed her. Couldn't protect her from Victor, from his world." She touched the locket she now wore, matching the twins. "But perhaps she led us here, to someone who could help us all stand strong." Henry thought about Sarah, about her belief that God put people in your path for a reason. "My wife used to say that love was the best security system, not because it makes the dangers go away, but because it gives you something worth fighting for." Inside, they heard one of the twins cry out in sleep. Before either of them could move, old Jack was already heading upstairs, his aging legs carrying him surely to his charges. The dog had appointed himself their personal guardian, sleeping between their beds each night. "We're not alone this time," Katerina said, her voice strengthening. "Victor's associates think they're dealing with two little girls, an old woman and a farmer." She smiled grimly. "They don't understand about family." "No," Henry agreed, watching another security team complete their perimeter check. "They surely don't." The threatening letter lay on the kitchen table, its expensive paper now stained with coffee rings and the twins' teardrops. But beside it lay something stronger, the Christmas photo they'd taken together, the whole unlikely family gathered around Sarah's old tree. Henry studied the faces in the picture, The twins' genuine smiles, Katerina's proud bearing, his own weathered features transformed by joy. Let them come, he thought again. Some things were worth any fight. Some families, once found, were worth moving heaven and earth to protect. The attack came during the deepest part of a moonless night, exactly 1 week after the letter. Henry was awake instantly at old Jack's low growl, followed by the silent flash of security alerts across the new monitoring systems in his room. Through his window, he caught the flicker of shadows moving across snow-covered fields, darker shapes against the darkness. His military training kicked in as he moved quietly down the hall. The twins' room was already empty. Katerina had implemented well-rehearsed procedures the moment the perimeter alerts triggered. He knew his girls would be in the reinforced panic room beneath the barn, protected by the best security personnel money could buy. "East fence breached," Michael Drake's voice whispered through the comm unit Henry now wore. "4 intruders. Thermal imaging shows military-grade equipment." Henry made his way to the kitchen, where Katerina stood calmly by the window, her aristocratic bearing incongruous with the tactical vest she wore. "They're more foolish than I expected," she said softly. "They actually think we've left the girls vulnerable." A flash of light swept the farmyard. The intruders had night vision equipment, but clearly didn't know about the farm's new defensive capabilities. They moved with professional precision toward the house, unaware they were being watched through multiple surveillance systems. "Remember," Drake's voice came again, "we want them alive. Interpol needs their testimony to close the entire network." Henry thought of the twins, probably huddled together in the panic room, their careful masks hiding terror. He thought of Sarah's farm, of all they'd built here, of the peace these men threatened to shatter. "Alive," he agreed grimly, "but they need to learn a permanent lesson about threatening our family." The first intruder reached the porch steps. Henry almost admired their skill. In any normal situation, their approach would have been flawless. But this wasn't a normal farm, and they weren't dealing with normal farmers. The trap was beautiful in its simplicity. As the men split up to cover different entry points, they triggered Henry's own addition to the security system. Irrigation pipes, normally used for the winter greenhouse, now releasing a carefully calculated spray that instantly froze in the January air. 4 sets of expensive tactical boots suddenly lost all traction on the ice-slick surfaces. The confusion that followed would have been almost comical if the stakes weren't so high. Drake's security teams emerged from concealed positions while local law enforcement vehicles, their lights suddenly blazing, roared up the driveway. The intruders found themselves not only surrounded, but physically unable to flee, their military training useless against simple farm engineering. "Drop your weapons," Drake's voice boomed through hidden speakers. "You're surrounded, and your employer's network is already compromised. Viktor Petrov's associates are being arrested across Europe as we speak." 3 of the men surrendered immediately, professionals knowing when they were beaten. But the 4th, a huge figure Henry, recognized from security briefings as Victor's former bodyguard, had other ideas. He managed to regain his footing and crashed through the kitchen door, perhaps hoping to find the twins where intelligence suggested they slept. Instead, he found Henry and Katerina waiting. The Countess stood her ground with generations of aristocratic authority, while Henry shifted into a stance learned long ago in army hand-to-hand combat training. "Your mistake," Katerina said in flawless Russian, "was thinking money was the strongest force in this world." The man raised his weapon, but old Jack, forgotten in the chaos, chose that moment to make his move. The elderly border collie might not have been a trained attack dog, but he had a herder's instinct for taking down larger opponents. His sudden bite to the intruder's ankle provided the distraction Henry needed. The fight was brief but decisive. Henry might have been older, now more farmer than soldier, but some skills never faded. When Drake's teams burst in seconds later, they found the bodyguards subdued on Sarah's kitchen floor, with old Jack standing guard and Henry checking him for weapons. "Clear," came the call from outside. "All threats neutralized. Suspects in custody." Henry's first thought was for the twins, but before he could move, the kitchen filled with the sound of running feet. Alexandra and Anastasia burst in, breaking every security protocol in their determination to reach their family. Behind them, their protective detail looked both exasperated and unsurprised. "We saw everything on the monitors," Anastasia exclaimed, throwing herself into Henry's arms while her sister clung to Katerina. "Dedushka, you were magnificent." "The ice trap," Alexandra added with fierce pride. "That was farming and physics combined, wasn't it? Just like you taught us." Henry held them close, feeling their hearts race, even as they tried to maintain their composure. These extraordinary girls, who could discuss advanced security systems and agricultural engineering in the same breath, who faced danger with inherited grace and learned courage. "Family," he said simply, including Katerina in his embrace, "protects its own." Outside, they could hear Sheriff Mills coordinating with federal authorities, while Drake's teams secured the suspects for transport. The night's darkness was giving way to dawn, painting the snow-covered fields in shades of rose and gold. Sarah's wind chimes, undisturbed by the chaos, rang out in the morning breeze. Old Jack, satisfied that his charges were safe, settled back into his guard position by the twins' feet. The old dog had earned himself a steak dinner, Henry decided. They all had. "Well," Katerina said, straightening her tactical vest with elegant dignity, "I believe this calls for a celebration breakfast. Oh, Jean-Luc stress bakes when he's worried. I smell cinnamon rolls in the panic room kitchen." The twins giggled, the sound washing away the night's tension. They were safe. They were together. And they had proved beyond any doubt that their unusual family was stronger than any threat money could buy. In the days following the attack, the Coleman farm settled into a different kind of quiet. The security teams remained vigilant, but their presence felt more like a comfort than a necessity now. International news briefly buzzed with stories about the dismantling of a major financial crime network, though the role of a Montana farm family remained carefully hidden from the headlines. The twins' nightmares, however, told a different story. They would wake calling out in multiple languages, English, Russian, and something older that Katerina identified as the ancient Georgian dialect their mother had spoken to them as babies. On those nights, the entire household would gather in the kitchen, where Jean-Luc's hot chocolate and Sarah's old quilts created a cocoon of safety. "Tell us again," Alexandra would ask, her composure fragile in the midnight hours, "about how Dedushka used farming to stop them." Henry would explain the physics behind the irrigation trap, watching their analytical minds engage with the problem, seeing how understanding helped them process their fear. Katerina added her own observations about tactical decisions, while old Jack kept his faithful vigil at their feet. "Your mother," Katerina said during one such session, "would have loved this solution. She always said the best defense came from understanding both sides of any equation, the financial and the practical." The twins were seeing a trauma specialist, one who understood both their aristocratic background and their new rural life. Dr. Sarah Bennett, her first name a coincidence, that felt like a blessing, came to the farm 3 times a week, conducting sessions in the greenhouse where the girls felt most at peace. "They're processing not just the recent threat," she explained to Henry and Katerina, "but layers of trauma, their mother's death, their father's betrayal, the kidnapping. But they have something now they didn't have before, a secure foundation, love without agenda, safety without price." The girls threw themselves into farm work with renewed enthusiasm, as if physical labor could ground them in the present. They expanded their chicken operation, presenting Henry with detailed plans for an organic egg business that combined their banking knowledge with his farming experience. "See?" Anastasia explained, pointing to their carefully drawn projections. "If we reinvest the initial profits into solar-powered incubators, we can increase production while maintaining sustainability." Her hands trembled slightly as she held the papers, but her voice was strong. Henry noticed how they'd signed the proposal with all their names, their formal Russian ones and the simple English versions they'd first given him at the auction. Both identities equally true, equally valued. Katerina, too, was changing. The elegant countess now kept rubber boots by the door alongside her designer shoes. She'd taken to joining Henry on his dawn checks of the property, her aristocratic bearing softened by genuine interest in the farm's operations. "I understand now," she said one morning, watching the sun rise over newly thawed fields. "Why Natalia always talked about getting back to real things. Banking, it's all numbers, abstractions. But here," she touched a sprouting wheat stalk, "here you can feel life growing." The security upgrades remained, but they evolved to match the farm's character. Cameras disguised as birdhouses, sensors hidden in ancient tree trunks, the panic room looking like a root cellar from outside. The farm's defenses, like its inhabitants, learned to bridge both worlds. One evening, Henry found the twins in Sarah's old sewing room, carefully stitching something onto their favorite quilts. Looking closer, he saw they were adding protection, symbols. Russian Orthodox crosses next to Sarah's Methodist Bible verses, ancient Georgian good luck charms beside traditional American quilting patterns. "Is it all right?" Helen asked anxiously. We wanted to add our family's protection to hers." Henry touched the careful stitching, feeling the love in every careful pass of the needle. "Sarah would be honored," he said softly. "She always said a quilt was just a story told in fabric. Now yours and hers are becoming the same story." Later that night, unable to sleep, he stood on his porch watching the security teams make their rounds. Sarah's wind chimes danced in the spring. Breeze, their melody mixing with the sound of the twins singing an old Russian lullaby to old Jack. "Well, love," he whispered to the stars, "you always said God works in mysterious ways, but I bet even you never saw this coming. European aristocrats and Montana farmers making something new together." The farm felt different now, stronger, not just in its defenses but in its heart. They had faced a threat and emerged not just victorious, but more truly unified. Their unusual family had been tested in fire and, like well-forged steel, had only grown stronger. Dr. Bennett had said something that stuck with Henry. "Sometimes it takes a crisis to show us who we really are." Your girls now know, bone deep, that they're not just banking heiresses or farm children, they're both, and they're loved for all of it. Inside, he heard Katerina reading aloud from Sarah's old family Bible, her aristocratic voice giving new music to the familiar words. "Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things." And wasn't that the truth of it? Love had brought them together, love had helped them fight, and love would heal what fear had wounded. Different languages, different worlds, different wounds, all mending together into something new and wonderful. Spring brought more than just new growth to the Coleman farm. The old hay barn, carefully renovated while preserving its weathered character, opened its doors as the Sarah Coleman Center for Sustainable Agriculture. The twins had insisted on the name, and Henry found himself grateful every day for the way they honored his wife's memory. "It's perfect," Alexandra declared, leading a tour for the first group of international students. "See how the solar panels align with the original roof angle, and the rainwater collection system uses the same paths grandfather's father established in 1940. The center had become something unique in the agricultural world, a place where traditional farming wisdom met cutting-edge technology and international finance. Katerina's connections brought guest lecturers from Europe's top agricultural universities, while Henry's practical experience grounded their theories in reality. Today's lesson, Anastasia announced to a class of visiting bankers, is about understanding the real value behind agricultural investments. She stood confidently beside Henry in the demonstration field, her rubber boots paired incongruously with a designer jacket. "Before you can trade wheat futures, you should know how to test wheat quality with your own hands." The transformation went beyond education. The farm's new irrigation systems had inspired neighboring properties to adopt similar sustainable practices. The twins' organic egg operation had grown into a profitable model of small-scale agriculture, proving that traditional farming could thrive in the modern economy. "Your mother would be proud," Henry overheard Katerina telling the girls one evening. They sat in the greenhouse, surrounded by experimental crops the students were monitoring. "She always said banking should serve the real world, not just shuffle numbers." The security remained subtle but effective. Students underwent careful background checks, and Drake's team maintained their vigilant presence. But now, the protective measures felt less like barriers and more like prudent precautions. Like the storm shelters every Montana farmer maintained. Against nature's threats, Jean-Luc had expanded his domain from the farmhouse kitchen to include a small cafe in the education center, where his fusion of French cuisine and local ingredients attracted visitors from across the state. "The secret," he confided to his rapt audience, "is understanding the soul of both traditions, non." The twins thrived in their dual roles as students and teachers. Their European tutors now conducted lessons in the center's high-tech classroom, while local farmers sought their advice on sustainable business practices. They moved effortlessly between discussing international finance and demonstrating proper chicken coop maintenance. "Watch this," Henry said proudly to Sheriff Mills, who'd stopped by for his regular coffee. On the main screen, Anastasia was conducting a video conference with Swiss banking executives, explaining how understanding soil chemistry had improved her grasp of market fundamentals. In the adjacent field, Alexandra led a practical session on organic pest control, her aristocratic accent adding unexpected authority to discussions of beneficial insects. Old Jack had appointed himself the center's unofficial greeter, his aging legs still carrying him on daily inspection rounds. The students quickly learned to keep treats in their pockets for the beloved border collie who'd helped protect the farm's youngest teachers. The educational program reflected their unique family story. Traditional American farming techniques were taught alongside European agricultural innovations. The twins incorporated their grandmother's old world wisdom about land stewardship, while Henry shared 3 generations of practical Montana experience. Even Sarah's presence was felt in the handmade quilts decorating the center's walls, their patterns telling stories of weather cycles and crop rotation. "We're creating something unprecedented," Katerina observed one evening, reviewing applications from prospective students. "A place where theory meets practice, where old wisdom meets new technology, where different worlds learn to work together." The farm's success had attracted attention from agricultural programs worldwide, but Henry's favorite moments were the quiet ones, watching the twins explain photosynthesis to local children using Sarah's old garden as a classroom, or seeing Katerina discuss crop insurance with neighboring farmers over coffee and Jean-Luc's pastries. "The Coleman farm," he overheard one student tell another, "is where you learn that everything's connected. Banking to farming, past to future, people to land." Henry smiled, thinking of Sarah's dreams for the property. She'd wanted it to be more than just a farm. She'd wanted it to be a place of learning, of growth, of connection. Now, through the most unexpected circumstances, her vision had come to life in ways she could never have imagined. That evening, watching the sunset paint the education center's solar panels in gold, Henry felt a deep sense of rightness. The old hay barn still held its memories, but now it also held hope for the future. Traditional skills were being preserved while new ones were being born. And at the heart of it all was family, not bound by blood, but by something stronger. Shared purpose, shared values, shared love. The idea was born, like many important things on the farm, during a late-night kitchen discussion. The twins had been unusually quiet during dinner, and Henry recognized the look they shared, the one that meant they were working up to something significant. "We've been thinking," Alexandra began, her fingers absently tracing the familiar pattern of Sarah's tablecloth, "about other children like us, Not necessarily banking heiresses, but children who need a safe harbor, Anastasia finished. Who need someone to raise a paddle for them? Katerina set down her coffee cup, her eyes meeting Henry's across the table. They'd both noticed how the girls had been affected by recent news stories about displaced children, their own experiences giving them a unique perspective on childhood trauma and recovery. We want to use our trust funds, Alexandra continued, her voice growing stronger. Not all of them, of course. Grandmother taught us about responsible finance. But enough to start a foundation, the Coleman Volkoff Foundation for Children's Sanctuary. Henry listened as they outlined their plan, pride swelling in his chest. They'd clearly done their research, combining their banking knowledge with the practical lessons they'd learned on the farm. The foundation would identify children in crisis situations and provide them with safe places to heal and grow. Using the Coleman Farms model of combining education with practical skills and emotional support. We could start here, Anastasia explained, spreading out carefully prepared documents. The education center already has the infrastructure. We could add residential facilities, expand the programs to include trauma recovery like we had with Dr. Bennett. And it wouldn't just be agriculture, Alexandra added quickly, though that would remain central because working with the land is healing. But we'd incorporate other skills too. Banking, business, arts, whatever helps each child find their path. Katerina picked up one of their proposal sheets, her aristocratic bearing softening with evident emotion. You've put considerable thought into this. The financial modeling is excellent. We learned from the best, Anastasia smiled. Banking from you and Mother, practical application from Dedushka, and heart. She glanced at Sarah's photo on the wall. Well, that we learned from both our families. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity as their vision took shape. The Foundation's legal framework combined the best of European and American philanthropic models with safeguards to ensure it would continue their mission for generations to come. The twins insisted on naming Henry and Katerina as founding board members, their different perspectives ensuring the foundation would maintain its balance of practical help and broader opportunity. The first new buildings rose behind the education center, dormitories designed to feel like homes, not institutions. The twins oversaw every detail, from security features hidden within warm, welcoming architecture to gardens where children could experience the healing power of growing things. Every child deserves what we found here, Alexandra explained to a group of potential donors. Not just physical safety, but the chance to discover who they really are, away from whatever storms they're fleeing. The Foundation's first residents arrived in early fall. 3 siblings from a troubled city background, 2 refugee children from a war zone, and a quiet boy who reminded Henry of himself at that age, carrying adult burdens too soon. The twins, now confident teenagers themselves, took naturally to their role as peer mentors. See how you test the soil, Henry overheard Anastasia explaining to the youngest refugee girl. The earth doesn't care where you came from or what happened to you. It just wants to grow things with you. The Foundation quickly gained attention in both philanthropic and agricultural circles. Katerina's banking connections brought endowments and partnerships, while Henry's farming network provided practical support and opportunities. But more importantly, it gave their unique family model the chance to help others heal and grow. We're creating more than a sanctuary, Katerina observed one evening, watching the new children help with evening chores. We're building bridges between different worlds, different experiences. The site of the Coleman farm at sunset now included more than just agricultural activity. Children from various backgrounds played basketball on a court beside the chicken coops. Teenagers studied sustainable business practices in classrooms overlooking organic gardens. Trauma counselors held sessions while walking the fields with their young clients. Sarah, Henry whispered to the evening air, I wish you could see how your dream has grown. The twins had incorporated elements of their mother Natalia's philosophy too, the belief that true wealth lay in helping others grow stronger. Each child at the foundation received both practical skills and access to educational opportunities that could transform their futures. "It's like that first day at the auction," Alexandra said softly, joining Henry on the porch. "You saw past what we seemed to be, saw what we could become with just a little help and a lot of love." Old Jack, now moving slowly but still determined, made his rounds among the new children, offering his special brand of furry therapy. The evening air carried the mingled sounds of multiple languages, laughter, and Sarah's wind chimes, a symphony of healing and hope. The foundation wasn't just securing the twins' legacy or the farm's future, it was creating something larger than all of them, a place where different worlds could meet, where broken things could mend, where love could transform fear into opportunity, just as their unusual family had done, one step at a time. 1 year to the day after the auction that changed everything, Henry stood in his farmhouse kitchen, watching the sunrise paint the expanded property in shades of gold. The calendar on the wall, still Sarah's old magnetic one, was now covered in the mix of English and Russian notes, tracking everything from crop rotations to foundation board meetings. "Happy anniversary, Dedushka," came 2 synchronized voices behind him. The twins entered with their usual grace, though they now moved with the confident ease of teenagers who knew exactly where they belonged. They carried a carefully wrapped package, which they placed on the kitchen table with ceremonial precision. "We had it made specially," Alexandra explained, as Henry unwrapped a beautifully crafted photo frame. "Look at all the pieces." The frame told their story in intricate inlaid wood. Montana pine mixed with Russian oak, the grains flowing together like streams joining into rivers. But it was the photograph inside that caught Henry's breath. A professional family portrait taken at the foundation's opening ceremony. Henry and Katerina sat in the center, the twins standing behind them, all 4 surrounded by the first group of foundation children. Old Jack lay at their feet, grey-muzzled but proud, while the education center and new residential buildings formed a perfect backdrop. "Look closer," Anastasia urged, pointing to the frame's corners. Tiny symbols had been carved into the wood. Sarah's favorite Bible verse, Natalia's banking house crest, the Coleman Farm's original cattle brand, and the Volkov family seal. "All the pieces that made us who we are." Katerina joined them, carrying coffee in Sarah's old cups. She'd long since mastered the percolator, though she still maintained that doing it herself made the coffee taste better than any Swiss machine. "And could manage. I have something for today, too," she said, producing an envelope. Inside was a newspaper clipping, the auction notice from that fateful day, now seeming like a lifetime ago. To remind us how God's greatest gifts often come disguised as life's hardest moments. The morning brought a steady stream of visitors. Sheriff Mills stopped by with fresh donuts, no longer needing to check on their security, but keeping up the habit out of friendship. Michael Drake's security team, now as much a part of the farm as the cattle, presented their own anniversary gift, a state-of-the-art monitoring system disguised as a traditional weather vane, crowned with Sarah's beloved rooster design. Jean-Luc outdid himself preparing a celebration lunch, combining traditional Montana ranch cooking with European elegance in a way that perfectly symbolized their blended family. The foundation's children joined them, each carrying small gifts they'd made in the center's workshops, handcrafted items that showed how they too were learning to combine different worlds and skills. "Tell us the story again," asked Maria, one of the first foundation children, as they all settled around the expanded kitchen table. About the auction and the paddle. The twins exchanged glances with Henry, their eyes bright with memory. It'd become almost a foundation ritual, sharing their story to show how hope could arrive in unexpected moments, how family could be found in unlikely places. "Well," Henry began, his weathered hand finding Katerina's while the twins leaned. In close, it was a morning just like any other at the county auction. As he told the tale, Henry looked around at what that simple raised paddle had created. The education center was thriving, its innovative programs drawing attention from agricultural schools worldwide. The foundation had already helped dozens of children find their paths, combining practical skills with emotional healing. The farm itself had become a model of sustainable agriculture, proving that traditional wisdom and modern innovation could work hand in hand. But more than the visible achievements, he saw the invisible bonds that had grown between them all. The way Katerina now moved confidently through the barn in her designer boots, discussing crop futures with local farmers. How the twins switched effortlessly between running international video conferences and helping birth calves. The mixture of languages and traditions that had become their own unique family culture. Sarah's wind chimes caught the afternoon breeze, their familiar song carrying across fields where new crops grew alongside traditional plantings. The security teams maintained their careful watch, but their presence felt more like family protection than defensive necessity. Old Jack dozed in his favorite sunny spot, surrounded by foundation children who treated him like a beloved grandfather. No, Katerina said softly as the story ended. In old Russian tales, they say true family is not born from blood, but grown from love. Like your wheat fields, Henry, with proper care and patience, it becomes something stronger than its beginnings. Alexandra touched the locket she still wore, now matched by similar ones worn by some of the foundation girls. Mother would have loved this, all of it. Sarah too, Henry added, his voice rich with certainty. She always said love was like good farmland. The more you work it, the more it can grow. As evening approached, they gathered on the porch, the unlikely family that fate or providence had brought together. The foundation children played in the yard, while the twins helped Jean-Luc set up for dinner, their aristocratic manners now softened by farm-learned practicality. Katerina reviewed agricultural investment reports with the same attention she'd once given only to banking documents, while Henry watched it all with quiet gratitude. The last rays of sun caught the education center's windows, reflecting back. Like a promise kept, one raised paddle, one moment of choosing love over caution, had grown into something none of them could have imagined. Different worlds, different wounds, different dreams, all flowing together like the grains in the anniversary frame, creating something stronger and more beautiful than any single strand could be alone. Well, Sarah, Henry whispered to the sunset, look what your farm grew into. Look what we all grew into together. The wind chimes answered with their gentle song, mixing with the evening sounds of their expanded family. English, Russian, and laughter all blending into the music of home.